I'm Rebecca, and we are
Mama Bear Apologetics.
We're just two gals talking about life's big questions from a biblical worldview. Because when it comes to the battle of ideas, we need to be able to say, mess with my kids and I will demolish your arguments.
You mess, I demolish. Got it? Capiche?
Rise up, ladies.
Rise up, Mama Bears.
This might not affect your faith,
but it might affect your children's.
Welcome to another episode of Mama Bear Apologetics. I'm Hillary.
I'm Rebecca.
And so today we're going to be talking about something that was kind of birthed from a Twitter, I don't want to call it a Twitter battle because it wasn't really a battle. I kind of stepped out and actually we had some pretty awesome.
It was a troll attack.
It was a troll attack, yeah. We actually had some really cool Papa Bears come in and I stepped back because they just started going after this guy and I was like, I don't even have to say anything.
Yay, Papa Bears.
Yay, we have Papa Bears. So the title for today's podcast is How Educated Do You Have to Be to Identify Nonsense?
It's very Chestertonian of you.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
So it started out with this original quote that I posted from John Lennox. So John Lennox is a mathematician. Is he at Cambridge or Oxford?
He's at Oxford.
He's at Oxford. So he's an Oxford professor of mathematics, one of the most brilliant guys out there. But one of his brilliances, is that a word?
Brilliancies, I don't
know, whatever. One of the things that makes him so awesome is how much common sense he has.
Yeah.
And he doesn't mince words, and he doesn't, I don't know, he can speak to the everyday man, and he can say something that is just so obvious, but for some reason coming from a PhD mathematician, it just sounds more brilliant.
Yes, and it works right into our topic today, doesn't it?
Well, in some ways, I feel like sometimes it seems like certain levels of education are trying to educate you out of common sense. And so when you hear someone who has gone through that whole rigmarole and who has gone through all the hoops and jumps and stuff like that, and then they still come back to common sense, there's something refreshing about that.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. And he has such a kind demeanor.
Yes.
In his delivery.
I know. I wish he would adopt me as his granddaughter. You can be my grandpa.
Well, you know who his niece is?
Who?
The singers that used to sing with Stuart Townend that they write, the Gettys,
I don't know them.
They write Christian music. They're Irish, husband and wife.
Huh. Okay.
And they okay. I can't look it up, but anyway.
Our internet's broken, so we can't look it up. So anyway, here's the quote that I'd originally posted, and actually I heard him give a talk several years ago at a Ratio Christi event where he said something along the same lines, and I remember just being like, yes, when he said it the first time. So this is what John Lennox says. What Stephen Hawking says in his book, The Grand Design, is the universe exists because it needed to exist, and because it needed to exist, it therefore created itself.
Because it needed to do it.
It needed to do it, of course. His conclusion merely restates his premise, which means his argument is circular. Nonsense is nonsense, even when spoken by famous scientists.
And that statement is nonsense. Maybe it's just bad use of the English language and logic. Maybe he meant something else. But.
Well, so what happened after this is there was a guy on Twitter that just kind of said, well, why do I get the feeling you have no idea what you're talking about? And I honestly think it's because we have the name Mama Bear Apologetics. He saw the name Mom in there, and he immediately thought just these dopey little housewives that have no idea what they're doing, no idea what they're talking about. They just, throw stuff out there. So I have to admit, my feathers got a little ruffled.
You went into Mama Bear mode?
I did go into Mama Bear mode. So I had to phrase this several times to be able to get all of our...
Don't mess with our housewives. Yes.
So I asked him, which part of our biochem, Masters in Biology, Masters in Engineering, protein crystallography research, and NASA job do you feel disqualifies us? Because, when you put our credentials side by side between you, me, and Catherine, that's nothing to sneeze at.
Unless you have really bad allergies.
And then you sneeze at everything. It's like he was obviously assuming that we had no idea what we were talking about when it came to scientific things. So it's not like I was wanting to just then somebody else later on criticized me for flaunting our STEM degrees. So I'm like, okay, if we don't have the STEM degrees, we're going to get criticized for not knowing what we're talking about. And if we state our STEM degrees, then we're going to get accused for flaunting our STEM degrees.
You're darned if you do, and you're darned if you don't. You're just plain darned.
That's right. We're just darned. So whatever we do, it's going to be wrong. So at this time, I just erred on the side of, you know what, we do know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
He was able to come back to me and tell me exactly what it was that he found was still lacking in our credentials. And he says that it was the part that nowhere deals with theoretical physics or philosophy.
Yes, but we do understand language, and we do understand logic, and that was a very nonsensical statement from Hawking.
And I think it's very interesting that he would bring up philosophy, saying that the fact that we don't know philosophy, considering that the person whom he's defending, Stephen Hawking, has been known to say that philosophy is dead.
If you exist and you're a human being, you do philosophy, right?
Exactly.
Everyone.
What was that quote that you had?
Okay.
Of course, it's a Chesterton quote.
Yes. Chesterton wrote, "Philosophy is not the concern of those who pass through divinity and greats, but of those who pass through birth and death. Nearly all the more awful and abstruse statements can be put into words of one syllable, from a child is born to a soul is damned. If the ordinary man may not discuss existence, why should he be asked to conduct it?"
I like that last sentence. If the ordinary man may not discuss existence, why should he be asked to conduct it? So we are all living, and we are all existing. You know, what is it? Ergo cognito sum. I think, therefore I am. That's something that it doesn't matter what level of education. If you're existing, then you have some means of understanding.
Experiential knowledge of it, yes.
Yeah, so just this idea that we want to ask, how educated do you have to be in order to identify nonsense? So we want to talk about a couple of misconceptions regarding what you have to have in order to have an intelligent statement about something. And then also, how would you respond, you know, as moms, where, you know, some of the moms out there, maybe they don't have advanced degrees. Some of them may not have bachelor's degrees, but there are certain things that we are endowed with. Just the fact that God has given us rational faculties and a rational mind, there are things that we are endowed with. It doesn't matter what kind of education we have. There's certain things we have been gifted with, you know, just by being a rational being, that unless we know how to tap into those things, we're just going to hear what these people say. They're going to dismiss us, and we're going to think that they have a point, and they don't. Because I think that we are much more capable than we give ourselves credit for, and society will constantly try to be telling us that we're not. So the first misconception we're going to talk about is that you have to be an expert to have an opinion. And I'm going to change that word opinion to an intelligent statement about something.
Yes.
That you have to be an expert in order to have an intelligent statement.
Yes. So we see this a lot today, where in order to shut down a discussion of some heated topic, someone says, well, you do not know what it's like to be a woman, or you don't know what it's like to be this or that. And so,
or you're not a theoretical physicist, so you can't identify a nonsensical statement.
Yeah, you're not a physicist, so you can't make any judgment on what this theoretical physicist is saying. And that's a real extreme statement. Yes, there's some things that Stephen Hawking will say that I honestly I won't be able to judge because I don't know the math.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are other things, like a statement like that John Lennox read and was analyzing, that I can challenge Hawking on and say, maybe Hawking really was trying to say something else, and his command of the English language and logic is not very good. And so I can press him to explain himself further, or maybe it didn't have anything to begin with. And when we get into specifically what Hawking was talking about, this idea of the universe creating itself is something that defies logic. Yeah. And so we should press them on that. Yeah. You know.
And one person actually did point out, they say, well, isn't this the same thing as saying that God is a necessary being? So when we say the phrase necessary being, we mean that something, if it's necessary, it means that it must exist. And so in the statement that Hawking is making, he is saying that the universe is a necessary being, meaning the universe must exist. And because it must exist, it'll create itself from nothing. Now, Christians would say that God is a necessary being, meaning it's basically impossible for God not to exist. And someone was pointing out, well, isn't this the same thing as saying that God is a necessary being? This kind of brings us back to a really basic tenet that I think everybody needs to grapple with at some point. And that is that no matter what philosophy, no matter what worldview, no matter what religion or non-religion you come from, everybody has something everybody has a necessary being that they have faith in, to say that this is something that existed, that's self-existent, that's, eternal, uncaused, and is capable of creating. Because as we noticed what Hawking said, that the universe can and will create itself from nothing. So we have this something that exists beforehand that created out of nothing. So we can either have impersonal natural causes that are blind and impersonal. I can't remember if I said impersonal. We can either have that being the creator of everything, or we can posit something that is personal, creative, cognizant, like God, and saying that is the author of all things. Either way, you have to have faith that there was something that existed beforehand that's capable of creating. I would say that the Christian God, the God is detailed in Scripture, is a more logical cause.
And it fits more the data
of
the universe that we have, all the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's a better fit.
But that's just something that whenever people act like, oh, well, you have faith in God, that's just so irrational. You need to push them on where they think everything came from, because I guarantee you eventually you will get back to something that they cannot prove, that has to have existed beforehand. And that is capable of creating, no matter who it is. They will all get back to something. So that's one tactic.
And one thing that Hawking and others like Lawrence Krauss are doing here that we might want to mention in this particular case is that they are positing that something came from nothing.
Yeah.
But when you get down to brass tacks with them, from what I understand through apologists like William Lane Craig and other scientists that criticize them, they say, well, they're not really talking about nothing.
Yeah.
They're actually talking about something. It's called like a quantum vacuum or something like that. So they're doing linguistic gymnastics to try semantic things to try to get around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to the equivocation fallacy. When I say nothing, what I'm really meaning is a quantum vacuum and gravity instead of nothing. Because I think the first talk that I heard by Lennox, when I heard him say this quote the first time, was he was also talking about another quote by Stephen Hawking, where I think Hawking also says that because a law like gravity exists, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Well, I'm sorry, but gravity is something. And just the definition of gravity, I have difficulty with him thinking, because gravity, if you look at its basic definition, requires two bodies and an affinity or a pull between them. So it's like you can't even have gravity.
And we don't really even understand gravity. It is a mystery.
It is. It's one of those things that
we can assign a mathematical, just because mathematically we can describe something does not mean we understand it. Actually, it almost makes it less concrete and less real to put numbers to it in a way. So
we put numbers to it because we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't taste it, we can't smell it, we can't, whatever all the five senses. We can't do any of that for gravity, but we can mathematically describe it. We can see
its effects.
Its effects. That's exactly what I was going to say. We can see the effects of gravity, but we still don't know what gravity is or why things pull. I mean, we can understand it in terms of maybe centrifugal force. That kind of makes a little bit more sense. But when it comes to just base gravity, we don't understand it. But anyway, I think,
and there's different theories out there on what it is, but it's still, the experts don't always agree.
But just the fact that we can talk about it tells us that it's not nothing. So again, the equivocation fallacy, that's when someone uses the same word in two different senses. So when we say nothing, and when most people say nothing, they're saying the absence of anything. However, apparently when Hawking says nothing, he can also mean, well, by nothing I mean gravity and what do you keep calling it? The vacuum.
The quantum vacuum.
The quantum vacuum. Not
they may call it something different now. I don't know.
Yeah, not my area of expertise. We should get
not mine either.
I think Catherine's met another NASA girl who just works one floor up from where she used to work.
Yes, I've met her too. Yeah.
Yep. So we should ask her.
Yes, absolutely. She's a theoretical physicist, right?
Is she? Okay, so maybe we should add her on, so that way when that guy's like, you don't have any theoretical physicists, we could be like, boom, added one.
Oh, there she is.
Oh, there she is. She came. Guess what? She came out of nothing.
I love it.
So this misconception that you have to be an expert to have an educated statement or to have an intelligent statement on something. So we see this in, like the guy on Twitter. We see this as Rebecca started talking about it, in feminism and abortion, the idea you can't have an opinion if you're not a woman, so being a woman gives me expert opinion on being a woman.
And the reason why this is so effective to shutting down conversation is because it is a partial truth. There is truth in that statement. There is a limit to my empathy. So yes, I don't know completely, but I'm going to hear you out and hear your experience on this and try to let that inform my judgment or my statement. But that doesn't mean that I can't make a judgment or a statement automatically.
We see this with the abortion argument as well, and especially since my husband John is very, very active in the pro-life movement. And
he gets that a lot, doesn't he?
Oh, he gets that so much.
You don't have any skin in the game.
Yep, exactly. And so, but one of the things that I've heard people do, there's a disanalogy that I've heard people make that I would like to say, okay, this is a disanalogy, but I think I understand what they're going for. And there's actually a better analogy that you can make for this, and that's the idea of there are so many similarities between abortion and slavery. The arguments that are used for abortion, well, it's not really a person. Slavery said, they're 3/5 of a person, or this would really mess with our economics. The arguments for slavery said, oh, this would really mess with our economics. It's just you go point by point, and there's a lot of the same arguments that are going on. So a lot of people will try to use this analogy of, well, you don't own a slave, so you don't have a right to talk about a slave. And that's actually a disanalogy. The purpose of saying you're not a woman, so you can't have an opinion on abortion is because basically this isn't going to affect you. I would say if we were going to think of a better analogy to say as someone, you don't own a plantation, therefore you can't have an opinion. Because someone who had a plantation would obviously probably doing away with slavery would affect them more. But just the fact that it affects them more does not mean
that it's valid.
Or that it's any less right or wrong.
Slavery still is evil.
Slavery is still evil. It is wrong to own another human being and to treat them the way that, we know that slaves were treated. It's like that is itself wrong, and you don't have to be affected by it in order to identify that it's wrong.
And ultimately, I say we are affected. I think society is affected, and maybe not in more indirect ways, but it is affected.
Yeah, I would just say we've become callous and our consciences have become seared. And I think Clay Jones was talking about when he gives his talk on the problem of evil, or not the problem of evil, his talk is technically Why Does God Allow Evil? Which, by the way, I just got finished reading that book and I highly, highly recommend it.
Good.
It is excellent. I've got that.
That's his newest, right? His latest? Okay.
Yeah, I got that sucker all marked up.
Good stuff. We need to do a podcast on it.
Oh, we absolutely do, because I think it's probably, it's the only theodicy that's ever been able to make me okay with the problem of evil.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, though. I liked what I've heard from him.
Yep. So just the idea of having an expert opinion on things, people are starting to use degrees, like educational degrees, as like, this is the only way that you're allowed to speak on anything. And I think that's kind of dangerous.
And actually, I think it's even worse today. I just thought of this because, we have someone say, well, you're not an expert in science, so you can't criticize anything that Bill Nye says. Well, I can say, well, Bill Nye is not speaking science, he's actually speaking philosophy. But most scientists today are really poorly trained in the philosophy. Actually, and in fact, it's not required. I had a course in philosophy for my degree in biochemistry only because I took it as an elective. It is not required. And so I will say some of the worst philosophers are scientists today.
Yeah, I have seen that. And that's why you have, stuff like, Hawking's saying some of the things that he's saying, but he's also out of the other side of his mouth saying philosophy is dead. And as John Lennox pointed out, this is the kind of philosophy you get from someone who says that philosophy is dead.
And you can spot, I think one thing we're going to talk about is we can all be experts in fallacies and fallacious arguments.
Yes, we can. And we will get to that when we talk about how do we respond when someone is acting like you are not allowed to either have, I don't like calling it opinions, because sometimes it is opinion, but sometimes I think it's just intelligent statements or educated statements. So it can be any one of those. So how do we respond when people try to shut us up by using some of these? But we'll get to that.
It's a power play, I think.
It's a power play, yeah. So so our first misconception is you have to be an expert to have an educated statement, to have an intelligent statement, or to have an opinion. Our second misconception is all experts agree.
Yeah.
So this is one of the funny things is that they'll say, well, you're not an expert and my expert says this. Okay, well, just ask them, are there other experts who say otherwise? See if they're educated in what the other experts have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And
what are the critiques of this expert's opinion on this?
Yeah, what are some expert critiques? Because anytime you have something that's controversial, I guarantee you're going to have some expert critiques out there. So,
and a lot of times I found the minute you can bring up another expert that disagrees, then they start attacking that expert's credentials.
Yes.
I mean, that is, especially when you're dealing in the Christian community, like you're bringing up a Christian that has the same credentials, but they all of a sudden, just because they have a Christian point of view, then they're suspect. But anyway, I will warn people on that because that happens a lot.
I would say as soon as you see that, for the mama bears out there, that is what is called the ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem means to the man, meaning they're critiquing the man and not the idea. The second that you hear someone doing the ad hominem fallacy, where they're critiquing the person instead of the idea, that means that basically that's telling. If the other person has nothing to say about the idea, it's like allow them to say their piece, why they don't think this person is good, a credible source because of,
You don't need to defend the person.
You don't need to
Don't
defend
jump
the person.
into that rabbit trail with them.
In fact, you can say, okay, just for argument's sake, what if I were to agree that all those things are true? Now, let's
look at the argument.
Let's look at the argument again. So even if all those things are true, how does that affect the argument? What do you think of the argument? So let them say their piece. Don't try to interrupt them while they're going off on some rant about this person, because likely you're not going to dissuade them from whatever opinion they have of this person. Just go ahead and grant it.
And a lot of the times what you'll find is the ad hominem is coming because they aren't able to actually engage the argument.
Yeah, they're not able to engage the argument. Always bring it back to the argument or the idea, and that's why on Mama Bear we say all the time, we demolish ideas, we do not demolish people. So when someone starts going down the demolish person route, stop, kind of take a deep breath, let them say what they're going to say, and then just bring them back to the topic at hand. What about the idea? Because that's really what's at stake.
And if you can't, then that's maybe a good sign that they're not really interested in engaging with you in a fair way.
Yeah. If they're really not interested in engaging in the idea and they're only interested in engaging in the person, that either means that they really don't know what they're talking about, or they're not able to talk about it rationally. Because again,
they may be so upset about something.
They may be so upset. Again, I can't remember if we've discussed this before, but the idea of always paying attention to if the person you're talking to, if they've gone into the fight or flight mode.
Oh, that's good.
I addressed this. If you go back, and we'll have a link to this in the podcast notes. It was the article that I wrote on the late term abortion post that was making the rounds on Facebook. And so one of the points that I talked about in there is watching when a person goes into fight or flight, basically when they get really, really emotional, because what that does is it turns on the amygdala, which is that emotion receptor in your brain. It perceives if you're in danger. You don't have to actually be in danger. It's if the brain perceives danger. A person will go into fight or flight. It shuts down the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is where you have rational thought that takes place.
And there's nothing wrong with emotion per se. It's when it gets out of hand. So there's a key to being able to really see where it's gone beyond, and the reasoning faculty is not engaged.
It's when it gets mistaken for reason that's the problem.
Yeah, because it's okay for certain things to make us upset. I don't want to dismiss emotion altogether.
No.
Because we're not robots, and when we argue like robots, that can be very hurtful too. We can be very insensitive.
Yes.
So we want to engage the emotions, but in a calm and rational way where, like you said, there is a difference between just when someone is hit into a fight or flight mode. I mean, I know I've had it. Then when I'm upset, Lee knows there's no reasoning with me. He's like, okay, just let her.
Sometimes you gotta just let it take its course, and a lot of times with John, I'll at least have some inkling of reason to just tell him, don't try to reason with me right now.
Yeah.
I am really upset. I'm not gonna be able to do it, so just let me get over this. I just need time.
Yeah, take a breath. And if you're dealing with someone like that, sometimes that's what you have to step back from it.
So also on the idea that all experts agree, because obviously this is a misconception, all experts do not agree, especially if people are having a debate. There's likely at least some expert out there who disagrees. But what you might sometimes have is another fallacy called a no true Scotsman fallacy, where as soon as you say, well, my expert here says X, Y, Z.
I'm a true Scotsman, by the way. I mean, I'm very proud of my Scottish heritage. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Whatever, my grandfather was buried in the family plaid, so we have a family plaid, apparently.
Oh, you did? Well, yes, Morgan.
Actually, his was Calhoun.
Calhoun.
So the no true Scotsman fallacy is basically saying, well, they're not a real fill in the blank. They're not a real Scotsman. Or in this case, if we were talking science, well, they're not a real scientist. Well, they're not a real, fill in the blank. They're not a real theologian. All these different things. It's like if anybody disagrees with this opinion or this statement that I've brought forth and someone gives me an expert that disagrees, well, I'm going to find a reason why they're not a real expert. And so just be expecting that. And again,
you try to bring it back, if that's the case, to the argument and not the person, because that is a form of ad hominem, you could say. It's attacking their credentials.
Yeah, and also I think sometimes, I don't want to call it playing dumb, but it's kind of staying very calm and saying, oh, really, they're not real? Oh, what is it about them that makes them not real?
And what is it about this argument that's wrong?
Yeah.
That you can tell by, that they're obviously not, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, so explain to me.
So, this sounds reasonable.
Yeah, it sounds very reasonable to me. Can you explain to me why they're not a real scientist? They have a PhD in molecular biology. How are they not a real scientist? They have a PhD in molecular biology from Harvard. How are they not a real scientist?
Well, because they believe in God and they believe in creation ex nihilo, then they obviously can't be a real scientist. Well, it gets into things like that.
Well, Rebecca, that sounds like you're importing philosophy into science.
Oh, that's right.
No, that can't be. Philosophy is dead.
Oh, yes. Except mine.
Except yours. That's right.
My philosophy has killed all the others.
That's right. Well, that's kind of what they're trying to do. Actually, that's kind of funny, is that leads me to our third misconception. So our first one is that you have to be an expert to have an opinion, intelligent statement, educated statement. The second misconception is all experts agree, because most times they're not all experts agree, or else we wouldn't be having this debate in the first place. And the third misconception is philosophy is dead or it's unimportant. So this statement itself is kind of ridiculous, because even the statement itself, philosophy is dead, is a philosophical statement. There is no way to empirically prove that philosophy is dead.
No, you go to, in his lab, he has some mathematical formula that is for philosophy, the philosophy function, and it goes to 0.
She's joking, by the way.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
That is not true. There is no mathematical proof that philosophy is dead.
His philosophy function does. Anyway.
So just, if someone tries to say that philosophy is not important, just ask them, is that your philosophy? That philosophy is unimportant? Because it's one of those things where, there are so many self-refuting statements when it comes to when people try to dismiss philosophy, that if you just keep calling them on their self-refuting statements, well, that alone will send them into fight or flight, but it'll be because they realize they have no ground to stand on.
And the best way to do that is to ask questions.
Yes.
And not, because you don't want to attack people.
No.
Because in a way, when someone is already being dismissive like that, it might be because they're insecure.
Yeah.
And so they know that they're on, shaky ground. And so if you start just attacking them, it's going to be worse. And then they're just going to walk away and think Christians are hateful.
Yeah.
So those mama bears are just eat me alive.
Yeah, because we don't want to do that.
No.
And I get the picture of someone who is sitting on a tree branch and they're sawing off the tree branch that they're sitting on.
Yeah.
And that's essentially a lot of times what naturalism does, because naturalism says that, there is no right and wrong. We're just products of chemical reactions that brought us through the process of survival to where we are. And it's like, oh, really? Is that the conclusion that your brain has come to? Your brain, that is a process of chemical reactions through process of survival, has come upon this truth?
So why is it true?
Yeah, why is it true? How do I know that's not just survival? Maybe the new survival is saying that that's not true. Anyway, lots and lots of self-refuting statements when people think that philosophy is dead. And this also brings us, so those were our 3 misconceptions, but how do we respond to this? Because we do need to respond when people want to either try to silence us or act like we don't know what we're talking about, or that we can't know what we're talking about. I think we can stand confidently just with the Imago Dei, just the idea of we are created in the image of God, and that He has endowed us with rational faculties that need to be engaged. And so the way that we respond to these kind of ways of people trying to silence us is the number one thing, and I would say this hands down, the number one thing you could do is to know your logical fallacies.
Yes.
I took the logic class through Biola with Dr. Ken Samples, and absolutely...
Oh, he taught that at
Yeah,
Biola.
he did.
I didn't realize that.
He was so sweet. In fact, I didn't think I was going to get to meet him, and then when we did the residency, I realized he was going to be speaking one night, and so I came up, and he gave me a big ol' hug,
Oh, yay.
and he said, "You let me know what you mama bears if y'all never need
He
anything."
is a big supporter.
He is a very big supporter, but he has stories of students that have come to him in the past saying how empowered they feel by knowing their logical fallacies. That basically, sometimes I think there's a sense that sometimes people can be listening to what someone's saying and they're like, there's something wrong.
They intuit.
They intuit that there's something wrong with what this person's saying, but they don't know these fallacies enough to be able to pick it apart. Like, say, for
Or
example...
have the confidence to.
Yeah, or have the confidence.
They're just intimidated.
And so he has had students come to him and say, after your class, I feel empowered in a way that I haven't in any of my other classes. So I'm going to provide on the website. Ken Samples has a bunch of podcasts that actually go through the different logical fallacies. He's got that on the Reasons to Believe. There's like a 12-part series on Reasons to Believe. And then there's also some websites, the church, his home church, where he's done, I think it's called the Renaissance Christian series.
Okay. Great.
Excuse me, where he goes through a lot of these. And so I'm just going to recommend both of these. John and I were driving to Texas, I don't know, several months ago. And so I just kind of sent Ken a Facebook message and we're like, we're making it Ken Samples Day, because we just went and listened to like all his Logical Fallacies podcasts.
Oh, how wonderful. We can't do that when we drive places. It drive the girls crazy.
Yeah, they would probably go crazy, but when you got two nerds,
We have to
like,
listen to My Little Pony. We go crazy.
yeah, John and I can nerd fest it out in the car, so we had a good time. And
I'll
other
have
people
fun.
have been like, "Oh, you're so lucky to have a husband that would let you do that." I'm
I
like,
love
"Oh, he
it.
enjoys it."
Yeah, you both love it.
Yep. So we will provide a link for that. So if you want to have your own Nerd Fest Day, you can have your own Ken Samples Nerd Fest Day. It'll be awesome. So I just want to say that that's one way to respond. And there's a way to graciously point out logical fallacies. You don't have to yell at them and be like, "That's a red herring," or, "That's an appeal to unqualified authority next,"
In all caps, please don't do that. That's so mean.
Yes.
And it's so it's returning dismissiveness for dismissiveness.
When you embarrass someone into silence, you don't persuade them to your side. You basically make
Hurt them.
You hurt them to where they stew, to where they're ready to explode on the next person.
Yeah.
And the next person has no
And
idea.
I've seen that, unfortunately.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I've seen that too. That is not an uncommon thing. So that's one of the ways to respond. It's like, we've got these podcasts by Ken Samples. We got the stuff on Reasons to Believe. There's several books out there. I might put on the podcast notes later at some point if I can find a really good basic book on logical fallacies that I think will be...
Maybe you need to write it.
with all my spare time. I really actually would love to do that one day.
Maybe we could write it together.
Maybe we could
with
do
my
that.
spare time.
Okay.
Maybe your spare time, but mine will finally be like a real spare time.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Hillary's spare time plus Rebecca's spare time equals actual spare time. Yeah, maybe we should do that. The Mama Bear's Guide to Logical Fallacies.
Yeah.
So coming in 2024.
Yeah, for your baby bears.
For your baby bears. So that would be our first way, just to empowering you to respond. The second way would be to know the difference between objective and subjective truth. This is one that's very, very, I don't want to say intuitive. It's very obvious to me, but I hadn't really thought about writing more on it until I was recently sent Awana curriculum. So were you involved with Awana when you were young?
No, but my girls were
Okay.
for a while at a church we went to.
So I was involved with Awana. So I got an email, or Mama Bear got an email not too long ago from the president, I think he's the president of Awana Youth Ministries. And his email started out, "Hi, I'm president of Awana Youth Ministries," and in parentheses, "Yes, Awana has youth ministries." Which I think they qualify youth would be like 6th to 12th grade, which usually Awana stops at 5th grade. So this is a new direction that they're taking, and they have an apologetics curriculum.
Wow.
And so they were wanting to get the Mama Bear's opinion on that. And I said, well, he sent me like one sample chapter, and I was like, that's great. I think this sample chapter looks good, but I can't really give an opinion on something until I see the whole thing. I've had to eat my words before.
Yeah.
And so he was gracious, and he just sent us the leader's guide. So I've been looking over it, and it's really good. And it has videos that go with, if y'all hear the dogs in the background, I apologize.
It's Gilligan.
That's Gilligan, yes.
He's a cutie.
They have videos both for the leader and for the students. So in the leader's guide, it was just kind of talking about the difference between objective and subjective truth, how objective truth is completely depends on an object that is outside of your own mind. So to say something like, right now I have a gray shirt on, that has nothing to do with my perception. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. And whether or not my shirt is gray is either a true statement or a false statement, because basically it depends on the wavelength of light that you've got going on. So a subjective statement would be completely dependent on the person, what's going on in my mind. So I might say cookies and cream ice cream is the best ice cream, but that's not really...
It's wrong.
That's a wrong way to say it.
Well, no, it's wrong.
Okay, now it's time to go. Let's fight this one out.
Coffee ice cream.
Coffee?
Oh, yeah.
Ew.
Coffee with Jamocha, almond fudge. Anyway.
If I had to pick between coffee ice cream and no ice cream, I would pick no ice cream. So, yeah, you're wrong.
Okay.
So, anyway, that would probably be a...
You don't know my experience, though. You cannot say.
And that's true, and that's why neither of us can say that this ice cream or the other is the best ice cream. We can only say that it's my favorite ice cream, because that is true. The cookies and cream ice cream is my favorite ice cream.
I can use the no true Scotsman on you, then.
You're not a
Can I use the ad hominem? I'm sorry.
You can technically use whatever you like.
People that don't like coffee ice cream. I'm sorry.
Yes. So, but just to say, so that would be a subjective truth. Now, one of the things that I think in some of the videos that they have for this curriculum is they start going through different statements and have these students identify, is this a subjective
That's
truth?
Wonderful.
Yes, or an objective truth. And so until you get down to the place where the idea of Jesus was a real person. Now, is this a subjective truth or an objective truth? Does my personal opinion about your existence determine whether or not you exist, Rebecca?
I hope not.
Although John and I I won't go into that. We were reading... I've discovered that Madeleine L'Engle really kind of only had one good book, and the rest...
Yeah, we started reading the second and the third, and it fizzled out
it
quickly.
Keeps getting
but the girls
weirder and weirder.
Love the first one.
Oh, I love that. It's always been one of my favorites, too. Anyway, they have a scene in the Many Waters book where unicorns exist, but only if you believe in them, and if you stop believing in them, then they disappear.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Then they disappear. But it's kind of interesting. We can use that as, like, that's kind of how people treat Jesus, like, or that's how people treat babiness. Yeah. If you want the baby, then the baby exists. If you don't want the baby, then it's just a fetus.
Yeah, you can call it a fetus or you can call it a baby. Yeah.
Yep, and so, but that is irrational, and that's not the way the world works.
It's either a baby or not.
It's either a baby or not, and Jesus either existed or he didn't exist. Jesus either died on the cross or he did not die on the cross. Jesus either rose from the dead or he did not rise from the dead. There is no middle ground on this. This would be another logical principle called the law of excluded middle. Yeah. Where there's certain things where there's not really any kind of in-between that you can have between these.
Either is or it isn't.
Yeah, either is or isn't.
Can't really argue with existence.
Yeah, exactly. Existence is one of those, it's kind of like if you were going to go into binary language, the zeros and ones that you have in computers, it signifies zeros and ones on and off. There's no 0.5 in binary language. It's just zeros and ones.
Except my iPad seems to want 0.5. I'm sorry.
She was having iPad problems today. Just the idea between objective and subjective truth, another resource I'd like to recommend that I have read that I think is a pretty easy read it's called Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair, and it was co-written by Francis Beckwith and Greg Kokel.
Oh, both. And Francis Beckwith is wonderful, yes. But most people probably know Greg Kokel. I think we've mentioned him before. But.
Yeah. And we were just talking about this when we were talking about asking clarifying questions. To give a little plug, we've got a new Mama Bear that's doing a series called Playground Apologetics. Yeah. And so we are actually going through Greg Kokel's tactics questions. And so I just published...
She's pulling out the Columbo tactic on moms in the playground. She's going on with her coat and hat. I'm sorry.
Lots of good stuff going on there.
Yeah,
so
it's
just
really
a
great.
Quick plug for Playground Apologetics that you can see on Mama Bear Apologetics website on our blog. So our two ways so far to respond to these misconceptions is to know your logical fallacies and to know the difference between objective and subjective truth, because a lot of times people will try to phrase things as if they're subjective truth when they're actually objective. And just the fact that subjective truth exists doesn't mean that everything is subjective. So it's like some people will go the opposite direction. They'll think there's no subjective truth. It's all objective truth. And that's just as silly. But just because
and sometimes my opinion about, or my view of some objective truth is very subjective. I mean, it's complicated. The line between the two is often not so clearly seen. But
when it comes to the Christian faith, I think one of the beautiful things is it's based in history. It's based in historical events, and those are things that we can go back and we can what's the word? We can examine them.
We can test it.
And it's not based on, it's like most other religions are based on a single person's personal revelation. They went into a cave and God revealed XYZ to them, or they looked into a magic top hat and saw words on, were able to all these subjective experiences that, this technically happened in history, but it was experienced by one person and it was just everybody taking their word for it. When you go with Christianity, you can look back in history and you can look at extra biblical sources. You can look at
it's testable.
It's testable, and I like we just recently got Lydia McGrew's new book, Undesigned Coincidences.
Have you been reading it?
I started reading that, but then I left for Texas and left it there because I could take one book with me, and I took Clay Jones's book. But so these are things that you can investigate for yourself. And if you're not sure how to investigate the Christian claims, then I recommend going to someone who is a professional investigator, which would be J. Warner Wallace, and looking at his cold case Christianity.
And the McGrews, Lydia and Tim McGrew. They have some excellent evidential, we would call that evidential apologetics, and they are wonderful at it as well.
Absolutely. And so finally, how do we respond? Just don't let people intimidate you. A lot of times they're just using intimidation tactics, and just deciding to not be intimidated. And like we said, I think one of the ways to not be intimidated is to know your logical fallacies, is know how to know how to spot the difference between objective and subjective truth. And don't let them say nonsense.
Don't be bullied by nonsense.
Yes, don't be bullied with nonsense. Understand what real tolerance is, because this new definition of tolerance, where tolerance means saying that everybody's equally right. That itself is nonsense. The definition of tolerance requires disagreement.
Yeah.
You cannot have tolerance if everybody agrees. So basically, people who say everybody needs to agree, they're actually wanting to do away with tolerance, because tolerance requires disagreement in order to even exist.
They're more tyrannical than the bullies. Yeah.
It's really tyrannical. So that would be our podcast for today. So just in summary, we're talking about how educated you have to be to identify nonsense. Some misconceptions are that you have to be an expert to have an opinion or an intelligent, an intelligent statement or educated statements. That's not true. Another misconception is that all experts agree. That usually is not the case. And then another misconception is that philosophy is dead, or at least unimportant, and that there are a lot of circular reasoning and just self-refuting statements that go along with that. If you find yourself dealing with any of these, a way that you can respond, number one, just in preparation, is to know your logical fallacies, which we have links to the Ken Samples lectures. Know the difference between objective and subjective truth, and basically don't let people intimidate you. The Lord has given you a mind.
And be willing to, when they are accusing you of trying to be an expert, and it is in an area that you aren't, and you are, like I'm commenting on Stephen Hawking's math ability, then yes, they're right. But that most of the time we're not. They're trying to get us on other things.
We don't need. There are certain things that it's better to be an expert, and you carry more weight if you're an expert on something. And that's one of the reasons why we do need to have Christians that are in the academic spheres.
And I will say another thing too. I think science is used a lot today as a bully.
Yeah.
Don't be intimidated by the science, because one thing important that we have to remember is the science really can explain how things work. It can put numbers to things. It can maybe even predict things, but it doesn't necessarily tell us why.
It describes, it does not explain.
It describes, but it doesn't explain. And a lot of people think it explains away the need for explanation, and that's not true.
That is not true.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this was informative. Hopefully if you have been in the position of any of these misconceptions, you can know how to identify them now, and you have some tools for how to respond in the future. So
Right.
we'll just pray real quick, and then we'll be done for the day. Lord God, we thank you so much that you have given us rational minds. We thank you, God, that you have given us, we are made in the image of God, Lord, with rational faculties and with minds and with emotions and with just everything, Lord. We thank you that you've given us intelligence. We thank you that you've created laws for science, Lord, that we are able to explore and we are able to discover. There's so much good with all these things, Lord, and there's so many ways that, like every single good thing that you have given us, Lord, us humans have found a way to misuse it. So, Father God, I pray for the ladies out there, for those who have educated themselves. I pray that as moms, they won't let people act like they are uneducated, Lord. And even if they have not gone through formal education, Lord, I pray that they would recognize it themselves as a child of God and made in the image of God, that they do have access to things like logic, Lord, that they can exercise. And if someone is saying, even no matter how smart something sounds, if someone's saying something that's illogical, it's illogical, and you don't need a PhD to figure that out. And I pray, God, that you would just empower them to the point of where they would not be bullied, but that it would not be empowered to the point of where we become the bullies, Lord, because I pray that we would never become the bullies with whatever we know or with picking apart flaws in what other people say. I pray that we would be constantly looking for the person underneath the question, the hurting person, just underneath, Lord. We would be searching for the spiritual reality of what is going on with the person at all times, Father God, so that we would know how to love them as you love them, that we would see them as you see them. But at the same time, Lord, I just want to end with that, I think it's a C.S. Lewis quote, Lord, that good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than bad philosophy must be answered. That part of our jobs, Lord, of having dominion in this earth, Lord, is to exercise our minds to the fullest capacity, Lord. And I pray that the women that are listening and the men too, God, would not shirk from that, and that they would feel empowered and emboldened in order to pursue that aspect of loving you with all their minds.
Yes.
In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. This has been a Mama Bear Apologetics recording.
To learn more about Mama Bear Apologetics, please visit us on the web at www.mamabearapologetics.com.
Have you been stumped by your kids already?
Or maybe you have a nagging question of your own that you think would make a good podcast.
Send us an email to askthemamabears@gmail.com, and we will do our best.
Rise up, ladies.
Rise up, Mama Bears.
We are all in this together.